Yeah, just starting the recording now.
Brilliant. Yeah. So in terms of the agenda just for today, so expectations versus reality, just talking more broadly about that, then kind of an insight of what we do at PwC from a data perspective, kind of the data analytics perspective, and then talking about kind of these two more conceptually, the idea of extract, transform, or load, which you might hear abbreviated as ETL. The idea of feature engineering as well, I think, is often overlooked, but it's something that can be very valuable in any kind of data context. And then I'll just go through a quick example of what we do, what we've done with a client at PwC around some of these concepts. And I'll just talk briefly as well, just around some of the recruitment drives we're having and that may be of interest to you guys. So yeah, in terms of, so let's take a step back on this. So data is messy, it's awkward, there's a lot of noise. So I'm sure when you look at your sort of textbook examples, maybe if you're doing some quantitative analysis or machine learning or something like that, or often the examples are quite, everything is very neat and orderly, and the mess that comes at the start doesn't really come into play. But often what we do, and what we say at PwC as well, is it's almost like building blocks from Lego. So typically from a client as well, you might just, you don't really, you have to get an understanding of how things are stored and how you can access them, the controls over it, etc. So going to a point from where, you get your data, extract it out, get it into some format that's workable, and then present it visually. A lot of the kudos goes to the artistic side at step three there in terms of presenting visually, but there's a lot of hard yards that are earned prior to that. So I think that concept is really important to grasp. And I'm sure like you've come across this in your own projects where um, you might not have a data set that's very easy to interpret in its raw form, and you need to like build through it to actually get it to a point where you can do some analysis, or might be a visualization or something like that. So yeah, often the expectations are everything comes out quite clean, um, but reality isn't. So this example is the Iris data set, which is quite a famous data set around, that's typically used in machine learning and a kind of data analytics courses. Um, I know you guys are, there's kind of a mixture of people, some so business backgrounds, economics, science, engineering, etc. So this might be something you come across in certain contexts. But the idea with this is, with the Iris data set, is um, there's basically an analysis to determine the flower types. So there's three types there: red, green, and blue, based off different attributes. So the sepal and petal are just, the sizings of the pieces of the flower, if you like, and based off the length and widths. There was sort of a model built to identify um what the type is. So typically in this case, it was very clearly identifiable what kind of sits where, and you can see in the visuals that um, the red items, which is the Setosa, has quite distinctive values in terms of the different attributes. Say, for example, here on this guy on the length, so the length and width, you can see the way the red cluster is fairly common. So, like this is kind of great in terms of understanding the concepts, but getting to that point just requires a lot of grunt work in background, and so that um, I suppose how the different clusters are set up in this example. So I guess in reality, before we actually can get to a stage where um we have a nice clean data set and we can do like really lovely machine learning and advanced analytics and even AI or whatever, like we have to kind of, you know, get our ducks in a row in the background. So typically, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Futurama. I know hopefully it's not before, or it's not too late from your time, but it was something I watched as a kid. But a whole idea of trusting this data. So can you actually trust the data that you've been given? And typically where if you're working in like a consulting type role or an audit, it's coming from a third party and you don't have full visibility over everything. So you just need to really have that trust and um, reliance on the accuracy of the information before you actually start going in. Because if you build something fancy, a visual or a machine learning model or a piece of analytics, if the information coming into it at the start is terrible, like you'll get misleading results, and it's not really it's a waste of time in effect in if that's the case. So it's always good to have that in the back of your mind. And this just a little visual, so it might be slightly pixelated, but in terms of the tip of the iceberg, so you have, at the top there, you can see the data science, the visualization, the reporting and dashboards and so on. But underneath that is a whole load of kind of steps to get to that point. So the iceberg, it's a huge object floating around, but we only see the top of it. But within that, we need to understand the data, understand the requirements, the needs for what we want to do, extract it, transform it. We might set up some process to filter, summarize the data, set it up so that it can refresh on a nightly basis or refresh every minute, kind of based on the needs. So how we collect it, so like especially in any apps as well, where there's kind of a large amount of data or customer data. I'm thinking things like your taxi apps or your ordering food. Like there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the background that's almost offline, um, to produce what you see on screen. And then another, just I found this, came across this on Twitter. So Vicky Boykis, I think, is just an academic based in the US, kind of specializing in this field. So she was kind of curious around this poll around data scientists, and thankfully enough, what she's seen in her survey, so around cleaning and moving data, that actually corresponds quite well with what you guys came up with. So if you can just see on screen, um, so a couple people who might have been late coming in, we just did a little quick survey at the start, around what you think data professionals spend most of their time on. So, yeah, that's pretty. At least that's the kind of perception anyway around preparing data. So it is. I think it is fair in reality to say that, in that, if you don't get that right, there's a huge risk of stuff going wrong, and you can't rely on your deliverables down the line. So preparing it is important. Um, data janitor is something I've heard as a term recently. So I think that is fair enough, but I suppose it shouldn't be looked on as something that is, a chore. Like it is, there are a lot of tools that actually make this quite an interesting and rewarding thing, and I'll mention some of them as well. But yeah, it's just to highlight, and I'm sure it sounds like you guys, you know, have come across this concept before, which is good. So that's good to know, from my point of view. So yeah, so that's the reality. So slightly different to the textbook examples sometimes. In terms of what we kind of do at PwC, so for the data, so I suppose my team is with data analytics and assurance. We're a team of about 50, and we've grown quite rapidly in the last couple of years, and even with the COVID and remote working, we've still been able to grow our team and bring people in and work in a number of industries. So there's just some examples there, and you can probably think across these industries, data is prevalent everywhere. Like we see every day at 6 o'clock, the HSE publishes their numbers. There's a huge amount of work going on in the background to get all that information presented. Likewise, you're talking industries like aircraft leasing, banking, public sector, technology, etc. So like there's no industry that we can't help out with really. And I think you guys as well, if you have this skill set, it's like it's so valuable no matter where you go to in the workplace, or if you start your own business, just like it'll always be in demand regardless of what product or service you're really looking at. And then I suppose in terms of the client needs, so I briefly touched on it at the start, but again, there's a number of areas that we, from a data perspective, we would be working on. So I've just listed a few there. So typically within our business, it's structured as there's an audit pillar, a tax pillar, and an advisory pillar. So, but we would be spread across them all. So again, depending on the needs of the client and what they want to do, we're working across there. And I think particularly as well within the automation space, like there's a lot of growth in that area as well. And with the cloud technology, it makes that a lot easier for clients to build their products and meet their requirements, whether it could be for a governance perspective or a risk perspective or an audit perspective, as well as the more kind of value add items like visualizing their data and kind of building kind of cloud-based infrastructure as well. Yeah, and I guess at the heart of all of these, so regardless of who you're working with and what area you're working in, it's having the need for quality in your data is key. So again, if the information you get in is no use, then your results aren't going to really stack up. So that's why preparing it, as you guys identified in that question, is really key. So yeah, moving on to this concept of extract, transform, and load, I'll sometimes abbreviate as ETL. So I guess just to highlight this to you, so like we use this framework in a lot of our clients in PwC. So I guess extract, connecting and aggregating data from a number of platforms, and the idea with that is if you do the upfront investment, typically a client, unless you're maybe Google, where there's kind of you kind of run the world. Other smaller clients, your database is just built over time, and you build them to meet certain tactical needs, and there isn't always one picture. And also with us as well, what we find is clients might be operating in different territories where not everything kind of talks to each other. So when you need to extract information, often it's not just a simple one size fits all. You pull it out of a database. So it could be in lots of different formats, and you're trying to just get a clear picture of all that. So if you have that done up front, it just saves a whole lot of pain down the line, and ultimately you can set those things up whereby it's a standardized process and you can schedule it as well. Transformation. So I'll talk about kind of the idea of some of the tools on the market. Like typically transforming data, like I think that's kind of clear what that is, but you typically get it in one format from a client. It could be a spreadsheet or a database extract or a flat file or whatever, or a feed from an API even. But then you want to get it in a particular format that meets your needs. So you might want to summarize the information, you might want to filter it, you might want to add new fields, and then do that in a way that's repeatable and scalable. So within that, there is a lot of industry tools. So Alteryx is one of them, and that's kind of a drag and drop tool that's actually built on or so it's all just kind of icons that you can drag and drop to build your ETL process. And then obviously like language, like even the likes of your Pythons and your Ors of the world, you can apply the same concepts as well. But obviously that requires just a bit of knowledge of the coding and so on. So yeah, there's lots of ways you can do it. And then load is kind of just how you output that. So we've gone from a messy client extract, could be scattered around lots of different systems and databases. We've built some models that will help transform that, clean it up, put it in a nice format, and we've done it in a way that it can be repeatable. So if we need to do it again tomorrow or next month or next year, it's kind of all there set up. And then loading it is just when we have our extract, we can push that either into a database, a backend, or it could go into a visual or some report or something like that. So again, the idea with this is you kind of set up a whole process that when you want to go from your source information, your source data to an output, it's all kind of just flows seamlessly, and it's all set up in that way. So yeah, in terms of the three pillars, if you like, so extract. So these are just a number of areas I've come across where we would extract data. So the most crude would be a pen and paper, but thankfully that doesn't happen very often. CSVs, text files, Excel, Google Sheets, SQL, a database. So that's like your classic relational database. So you've a number of tables that with your columns and rows. Then you've the likes of your NoSQL. So MongoDB is one of those examples I have there. So where it's a bit more unstructured. So typically slightly messier to pull stuff out, but it's very valuable for clients in terms of building and developing in an agile way. And then XML, JSON as well. I think JSON seems to be getting very popular, that I've been finding people are seeing the benefits of it. But yeah, so ultimately, like, you're never going to, like, the client, especially when you're in that client relationship, they could, it's kind of their call how they store it. And often this is just whatever they have available and what works for them. So you just need to figure out a way of getting that information out and making sense of it when it's often messy to do so. So yeah, so like there's loads of other stuff here I haven't mentioned. So you're never going to have a one size fits all, and it's not always just the simple text file with the nice column headers. Like it can be often a messy thing, and getting access to it and knowing where to extract as well. Like sometimes I think I had one example where I received data from a client that was 10 gigabytes and it was in a zip folder, and when I pull it out, obviously it gets a lot larger. But when I dug into it, it was ultimately a couple of tables in a database that I actually really wanted. But getting to that stage took a lot of effort just to figure out, because the client didn't really understand their data because it was a third party that had built the system. So yeah, it's just there's that always that challenge starting off. So you just need to make sure you have an understanding of what's in there. Um, transform then. So yeah, I'm just going to show you through. So these are a couple of icons from a tool called Alteryx that I mentioned. There's also there's a number of other similar tools on the market, and it's a very much a growing field of this kind of what we call self-service analytics. But I might just flick these icons on screen. This is just, I suppose, to visualize what are the kind of key tasks for transformation. So when we talk about data transformation, like it's what it says on the tin. It's you have an initial set of data, you want to transform it in some way that puts it in a format that allows you to generate some output. So that could be, as I said, a visualization or a report or whatever. So some of the stuff in here, so cleaning your data, so that's kind of, you know, you might have blank spaces, leading white spaces, certain characters you don't want, and that was causing issues. So you might have names that are abbreviated, so just kind of getting that in. Checking for duplicates is the next one. So yeah, like the client might send you duplicate information. Like you can't assume that what they have is completely perfect or what you need. So they could have sent you something that's not correct. So it's just duplicate information can always happen. For whatever reason. Filtering, yeah, so you might have some records that you don't want. You might only want to be focusing on a particular period, a particular set of dates, particular set of customers, a geographical region. So I think filtering is, that gets rid of some noise. Regular expressions. So this is quite powerful. And like if anyone's kind of done in the programming space, you might have come across it in the likes of Python or Java or something. But that's obviously very useful if you might have a piece of data that is actually comprised of a number of components and you want to strip out those components. So typically, you might have uh, a number stored within a piece of text and you want to pull out that number and just get rid of the text around it. So that's always very useful to have. Sorting, yeah, that's straightforward. So you want the top 10 or the top 100 or whatever. Joining, so now this is kind of where things get interesting. So if anyone's done SQL, SQL, or databases, you might have come across this. So where you're just joining or merging different data sources. So this is where things can get very powerful and you can really bring insights to a client as well. So if you're able to link stuff together, that's quite good to have. Then summarizing is just simply, if I want to group stuff by a particular, customer or particular geographical area and get some nice statistics on that. You can use these kind of ETL tools as well for it. And then renaming fields. Yeah, you might want to rename stuff. The client might have. Sometimes the client doesn't give you fields, so fields of column headers if people aren't familiar with the terminology. But um, yeah, sometimes you mightn't have any. They might just be duds or incorrect. So you might want, or if you're pulling it from multiple sources, you might want to tidy that up as well. So that's what's out there. So I think, yeah, like these concepts aren't necessarily like tied to a particular tool. And I want to just get that point across that what we do in PwC isn't really, we do obviously have specialist tools and relationships with vendors and so on, but it's really depends on um the scenario and the need you're working on in terms of the tools you have. So if you understand the concepts and what you're trying to do, then I would say you can pretty much use any tool at your disposal to solve a problem. Um yeah, so what I'm going to look at here is just the concept next. And while we're talking about transformation, is just feature engineering, and this is just a very high level example. So we just have some items in here of customers in a bank. This is all just made up information. Their last repayment date. So you can see there, John, Alice, and Mary have repaid on their loan quite recently. Peter he hasn't done anything for a year. So if we think about what's on the left is what the client received from us. But then feature engineering is just simply taking information that's already there and augmenting it to create more columns. So the client didn't tell us the day since last repayment and the risk profile either, but we've just used some rules to determine that. So based on the first three guys, they've repaid quite recently and on time, therefore their risk profile is low. And Peter, unfortunately, he's in the high bucket. So, you know, we don't always get you kind of have to read between the lines a bit on this. So I think it stands out that, okay, well, he hasn't paid in a year, so there must be an issue there. But if you think of, if we have millions of rows, it's not always, you need a more robust solution than just seeing it by eye. So and you can, and then if you want to take this into another level of, you might be building machine learning or predictive tools, analysis, or further any kind of analysis. If you're able to build out more fields, more columns, it just gives you more insightful and richer information. Yeah, so we can derive new variables based on existing ones. So again, like that is quite straightforward. You might think, but it's surprising how powerful it can be when you just, you know, you're building out new information based on existing stuff you've got. Um, this is just another example. So in this case, Joe, um, he's kind of did 6 months of payments and repayment dates. So he's due to pay either his, say if he's paying interest on his mortgage or whatever, pays it at the end of the month. So for 6 months, we just pick these out, and he's repaid it on particular dates. So in this example, you can see there in July he's paid off on time. In August he hasn't. September's okay, and so on. So that's kind of, if you think about that, so on the left side, what we've been given by clients, say. But what we actually want to work out is, well, what's his kind of performance over time? So the late payment, this is again an engineered field, if you like. So we calculate that based off the difference between the due date and the repayment date. So we know that, okay, he was late here, he was late in other months. And then what we can build over time is actually the percentage he's paid. So obviously in month one, there's been no issues. So he's 100% compliant. When we get to month two, he was late that month. So he's been late once out of 2 months. So a small population, but 50% nonetheless. And then over time, we can see, okay, he seems to be improving a bit, but then he's stalled over coming up to Christmas. So he's down at that rate. And if you can imagine, then we could build that into a visualization, a nice line chart or a bar chart or something. And that's just for one customer. So then, we could be doing this across all of our customers, across different different counties, different types of property, maybe, um, different values of the mortgage. So again, like it's only a couple of additional columns, but we didn't have this information directly from the client. They didn't hand it to us, but we had a look through and said, these are additional things we could add in. So it's going to give extra insight. And I think that kind of, especially with like stuff that's point in time. So this is all like one, like individual dates for the customer. But in this case, we've actually been able to link them all together and tell a story of how things are going. Again, this is a very high level, crude example, but if you're looking at bigger data sets, then you could really see the value of having that view over time, particularly if you have thousands of customers and you've 10 years worth of information, or just lots of data points that you can engineer is the key thing. So not just, so there's maybe the raw stuff that's collected, but then you can actually build off that and build new features and get more insights off that as well. So yeah, deriving new variables using previous data also. So that's kind of the transformation step. So the thing about it, at this stage, we've extracted out from the client, we've worked our way through the mess and the chaos that often comes out of that. We might have built in some new pieces of insight to augment our data set. So then we just want to load this up. So the load stage is typically how we present the outputs or reports. So as I said, we might have information coming in a number of different formats: JSON, CSV, Excel, SQL, etc. Um, we take all this, bring it together, we do our transformation. So we'll do our joining, our summaries, our filtering, feature engineering, etc. Once we've got all that, we've got like a consolidated single view of the world, and we can show this off. So yeah, so typically where you might push this into some database, whether it's your traditional database or it might be some cloud platform, or like a non-SQL based one. But the concept is, we've had lots of discrete sources, but now we've got one picture of how everything hangs together. And ultimately that means like you can't really build a visualization or develop a report without having like, really concrete data that you can trust and stand over. Because you'll just get torn apart if you haven't done that. And ultimately, like this helps with real time decision making, because the people, the executives and the decision makers, if you like, they're not going to have time to delve into their SQL database and the files, and ultimately a lot of them wouldn't have the expertise to do that. So if you're able to present a picture that's clear and it can help with real time decisions, it's just so valuable if you're able to have that skill set and apply it to these kind of concepts. So, and again, as I mentioned there, if you think about this process on screen, we might be getting in information like fairly real time, or maybe on a daily basis, say, collecting it from customers. So if we're collecting it in here, obviously it might be in different formats, but if we're collecting it, excuse me, and it's scheduled in some way to be transformed, then get pushed into a single view, then the outputs, particularly if it's a visual, if it's a report, that's a little bit static, but like the visuals are all the rage, if you like. So the fact that when a customer purchases a product or takes out, is granted a mortgage or whatever, like that all just flows through to the outputs almost straight away. That's kind of the end goal with a lot of this. If you can get there, you're doing really well. Um, so it just like it makes that whole decision making aspect much more accurate. So I'll just touch on an example of how we applied this ECL concept to one of our clients. So one of the clients here we looked at was in the healthcare industry. So it's kind of a GP administrator. So some of the GPs, like your local doctor, might a lot of them just operate as kind of a small business, but some of them actually pool their resources together and they have shared infrastructure and that kind of thing. So the challenge they had was they couldn't get a single view of all their GPs. I think there's like 40 or 50 across the country. So they all had different reporting, and the structure of their information was inconsistent. So while they could go to, say, the GP down the road in Donnybrook or wherever, or in Cork or Galway or wherever you want to be, they couldn't really compare between all of them, and they couldn't just get a single view of everything that was happening. So we were able to leverage, so what they had kind of in their existing databases, and the information they were collecting from patients and so on, leverage that, kind of pool it all together, and then build out visual reporting that's kind of delivered to them on an ongoing basis on some key metrics. So, yeah, what in terms of the three steps of the extract, transform, load. So there was a lot of patient data that was in PDF format. So if you know PDFs, it's not something that you can easily just edit and do calculations on. So we've actually built tools, first of all, to extract a lot of that out into flat files. And we've done this as well. I'll touch on a concept called robotic process automation, also called RPA. So this again can do this in an automated way. So we're not having to manually scrape the data ourselves and run scripts. We can just pull it out and it's in a flat file format. So then that's how we obtain the information. So it's a lot of different reports and there's inconsistencies between different locations. So, but at least at this stage, we've got the information. So now we need to figure out how we transform it. So again, there's transformations, summaries, checks for completeness, accuracy, quality checks. And so like again, we've kind of built this using some of the kind of tools I mentioned earlier and some of the coding. So this means, we have our different reports from our 40 or so different GPs. Um, and we've consolidated that so that they all look the same now, and it's as if they all came from one master source, whereas they actually didn't. They were all just random stuff in different places. And then key with that is we're also just validating that what we got out from the client when we merge everything together, we can kind of have an element of traceability back. Do you have to questions coming in there? I think about manually checking errors. Yeah, so that's a good one actually. So extracting from PDFs, there it often depends on the reporting. So typically what we do see is um so say if it's numeric values, there'll be kind of summary counts or sum totals or checks on the number of pages. So we do perform those checks when the information is pulled out. So like say if you have a PDF that's 100 pages, you need to make sure that the page number in your output reflects that, and the number of records reflects what's in there. So they might have, in the PDF, the actual number of the page, the certain subtotals, certain record counts, and so on. So yeah, obviously that is fairly automated. Obviously, before delivering to a client, we would always ensure there's a manager level review that goes kind of in every job, but the actual checks are reasonably automated in that sense. So yeah, that's a good question though. Like it's something to that if you don't have that in place, then there's always a risk that the stuff you report out at the other side isn't accurate. So yeah, so once we pull that out, we start to do our transformations. Yeah, I was just going to say then within that, there's just further summaries we do just to validate that the information coming in to the transform step and going out kind of reconciled. So if we've summarized information or if we've filtered information, that we're not dropping stuff out that we shouldn't be. So obviously within this as well, there's a certain amount of domain knowledge and business knowledge you need to build up. So that's why it's important that you're not just the guy who or girl who is writing the code into the laptop in the corner. So if you're actually engaging with the client and building an understanding of the business. And I think, to be fair, the likes of PwC, you do get good exposure to that. So you're not just fully focused on the technical, there is the actual, well, what does the client actually need in this context? And then finally, yeah, like simply load. So once we've gone from, as I say, 40 different locations with different reports, consolidated them, done our checks, then we can push this into a single database and visualize for the client. So, we give the client metrics on kind of performance, or performance is the wrong word, but sort of patient records across the different GPs and what procedures have been performed, and if people are leveraging the medical card, there's just implications for that around tax and so on. But ultimately beforehand, people were having to. Now I don't know whether they were printing stuff off and reading it and getting a highlighter out, but they have this all in a single dashboard. So for dashboarding, there's a lot of visualization tools. So I only discovered recently with Google, like the Data Studio is quite good with that, and it's all cloud based. And there's also stuff like Power BI and Tableau and Click as well, which are kind of the industry leaders for desktop applications. So yeah, like I think a picture paints 1,000 words. So and it's just more interesting, more exciting when you have a visual. So that's kind of just how we've applied it. Again, this is very high level, so I don't want to get into massive detail, but the idea here is, again, going back to the iris example, we're not, we don't get a clean data set where it's just 4 columns and 3 categories. Like it doesn't really work like that in reality. So we need a process of how do we get to a stage where the the data set is clean and easy to use. And ETL is just a really great framework, I think, for doing that. And once you kind of have used this, you can very much apply it in other jobs and other contexts as well. So yeah, I guess the key takeaway is, do you truly understand and have trust in your data? So if the answer to that is yes, then that really gives you great comfort on when you want to do a visualization, or if you want to do some analysis, or if you go further and you're doing machine learning or stuff like that. So like it's just a question that you need to have at the back of your mind. And often when you're working in, particularly in the kind of role we're in, you're dealing with different clients on a daily basis. So you don't see you don't know the strange inner workings of what goes on at the start, so you need to just figure that out. But that does mean you get a more varied experience, and you're actually getting exposed to different ways of working, different clients, industries, quite early in your career as well. So and you find ways of, you'll see the common challenges that come up around, well, how they collect are they collecting their data in an efficient way? Is the data quality up to scratch? Are there issues with duplicate records and so on? So that's where like feature engineering and ETL really comes into it. So that kind of wraps up the sort of presentation for today. I might just take the time for a minute just to flag to you. And I think, Sam, I've sent, so obviously this is recorded anyway, but I've sent you on the slides as well. So I'm happy for you to distribute it out to the attendees. But yeah, just to know from PwC perspective, and this includes my own group within Data Analytics. So if you are interested, because I'd say there's probably not many J1s happening this summer by the looks of it. So it might be good to do a summer internship with PwC. So the date for this is closing on Monday the 1st. It's about 10 days, 10 or 11 days from now. So yeah, there's a link there anyway that you can go on. And obviously my own team, we'd be delighted to get people on board as well. So I'm within the risk assurance group, and there's a data analytics. Can international students? I I think yes, that should be fine, assuming that like if you're due to be, like, I don't know the question there, if you're going to be around by the summertime. So the internship is July, August. I think it's June, July, August, kind of around then. Um, so yeah, so I'm assuming on that question that when you say international student as well, is you're within like one of the universities here, and not an overseas university. So I think that should be fine. I can have a look into it, and Sam, I might pass that on to you, if I do. But I'd say go ahead and put in the application anyway. There's no harm. So yeah, 1st of February, and yeah, no, like it's definitely it's a great place to start off your career, and certainly from like the whole data and the digital perspective, we've really embraced that. And you know, remote working was actually a lot smoother for us than a lot of other people, just because we have the culture and the tools available for us to do that. So yeah, that's just another thing there. Yes, good question. Penultimate year students, I believe it is, yes. So um the summer, yeah, that's actually a great question. So the summer internship is only if you're in your second last year. Um so that's specific to this one. There is we do have an ongoing co-op program, so like placements. So some of you who might be in maybe first or second year now, that might be something that's what you call it, sorry, now that might be something that you might consider down the line as well. So that's kind of organized through your individual course. Um, and then also there's obviously ongoing recruitment. So if you're a final year, graduate recruitment is kind of an ongoing thing. So I'd say just keep an eye on the site, and for LinkedIn is quite good as well, and various social media. Um, yeah, just one more question there. Um, I don't know, the overseas students, I think that might be the same question, but yeah, if you would need to be, I think it's kind of been answered there. So the third level institute in Ireland. So yeah, I don't know if people are dialing in from overseas. Um, so the typically, yeah, it's your own territory where your university is based in. Um, but that said, like I would check out, like PwC is a network of firms. So if you're based outside of Ireland, there's opportunities there. And you know, we're based in countries, pretty much every country all over the world. So um, that's another benefit as well. So yeah, like happy to take. I know I've slightly run over a bit, so we're just after 7, but I'm happy to hang around for a while. If anyone has any questions, either anything else on the internship program or more specifically on the presentation and some of the concepts, or anything on PwC or data, or what you're doing for the weekend, that's fine as well. Not that we're doing much, but yeah, I'm happy to stick around if you want to just either shout out or drop it in the chat. I'll have happy to take them. So I think one has actually just come in there. So how many data engineers? Yeah, so I guess I talk about, I suppose the concept here was around data engineering, and one sec, um like the whole space around, you've like analytics, data science, data engineering, there's a lot of overlap between them. And sometimes people, you know, I find it hard sometimes differentiating because there's just so much overlap. But yeah, in our team, so there's about 50 of us that are in the group as such, and that would be split into, you'd have also you'd have like a partner who like leads the group, and then you might have a couple of senior managers, maybe 7 or 8 managers, and then the kind of key staff below that. So um I suppose we wouldn't always be working on the same thing. So typically you might have 2 or 3 people working on an engagement. Um, so yeah, like, and I suppose within that you wouldn't just be doing, pure coding all the time. There's an element of, you know, the business side of it and the technical side of it. Um, and also just so there's the ETL is kind of a kind of key thing we focus on, but as well as that, there is stuff like visualization. I mentioned as well, like the automation. So we've I think with the lockdown as well, that's kind of accelerated that. So using things like robotics to just automate processes, and then also using like kind of coding, the likes of app script, for example, is a good one. Like, so we are kind of based on the Google platform. So that's kind of a Google coding language that you can automate tasks on, like your Google Sheets and your calendar and so on. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's we've about, I wouldn't necessarily call them all data engineers, but they're data specialists within our team. So, and as I said, like that's broken down across different levels of experience. Anything else there? Yeah, any specific programming languages? Um, any specific? Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything specific. Like if you've done any kind of programming, that's always a benefit. And I found like the first language I did was, so I'm going to be controversial here. So this is a UCD led program, but I'm actually a former Trinity and DCU student. So just to put that out there. So when I started, it was Java was the kind of first one I did, and I couldn't. It took me a long time to just get the basics of it, but um, yeah, I think any language really is beneficial, but I think so whether it's Java or Python, I think SQL is quite good. Just I know it's not programming, but just the concepts of databases. So if you have that, great. But at the same time, even if you don't have programming experience, there's tools out there where you just have to think about the logical concepts rather than the sort of nitty gritty of coding. So you can always leverage them. And ultimately, like what I think as well is like you can be a wizard at writing code, but if you don't understand like the client needs and the business needs, like that can always hold you back a bit. So it's getting a balance between the two, and also like just showing an interest. And we always say like we're a learning firm. So um if you're showing a willingness to learn something new and put the effort in, and we don't expect it to be the finished product as such. Like the internship is basically a chance for you to see what the kind of industry is like and the work's like, but ultimately um sort of pick up these things as well. So I think the point around just putting in the enthusiasm, and I think the ownership, like really owning your career development is key. And then yeah, so another one there for Sam. So what sort of academic background do data analysts have? Good question. Like so I guess from our experience there's probably a mixture of people who, yeah, I probably actually, there's probably three groups I would put them in very broadly. So one is more from the business side, where you might have done like something like accounting or commerce or something like that. And typically a lot of that, like a lot of people do the accounting qualification as well with us because we are an audit firm. Um, so like the professional qualification as part of their graduate program, but they would then have the business skills and they're able to pick up like the data kind of the programming and the ETL stuff like quite quickly on the job. So, and I think that's useful to have as well as a business side. Then you might have people who are more sort of engineer, computer science type background, um, who have kind of maybe studied um, programming or databases or stuff. So they would have an idea of the technical side, but they would probably, the work gives them a chance to obviously further develop that, but also the business side as well. That they need to just kind of develop that side of the house. And then I'd say also what I've noticed as well, like a lot of a certain amount of people who would be more from a science background, um who might have done like the likes of your physics or maths or chemistry, but have kind of moved in. Maybe they've seen the light around data and analytics and moved there. But and like I think probably stuff where they like numbers basically is the key thing. But that said, like you'll find with PwC, there's a it's a every cohort is kind of represented, and diversity and inclusion is actually one of our key mantras. So I think that can be applied to your academic background as well as like your cultural background and so on. But yeah, I'd say broadly speaking, that's kind of the three I would see. So yeah, like science, engineering, and business, that would be the main things. But if you're not one of them, don't worry. Like please do go ahead and like give the internship a go, or have a look at our graduate recruitment as well on the likes of LinkedIn also. Grant, so I don't know if anyone has any other questions, or like if you want to drop something in the chat or go off mute, or I'm happy to take any more.
Thanks very much for that, Ciaran. Really, really appreciate it. Guys, if you do have any more questions, fire them in now. If not, thank you, Ciaran. That was fantastic.
Good, thanks, Sam.
And yeah, I'll share the slides with everyone after the call's over. So thanks again for that.
Yeah, no, and like thanks for having me on, and I think it's a really great initiative you're involved with. So you're leading the way. I think this would have been good when I was a student to have something like this, and I think having it remotely as well, it means obviously you can bring in people outside UCD. So it's really helpful. So yeah, you did great stuff, and best of luck with the rest of the year and exams and so on. And hopefully you get a bit of a summer as well. When we get the vaccine rolled out and so on.
Yeah, hopefully. Oh, there was another question there for you.
Yeah. So do we have research? Not with no. So not within PwC. It wouldn't be purely research space. What we often do though is when we're when you come in as an intern, so there'll be a certain amount of time you'd spend on client work, but then there'll be also another optional, well, not optional, it's mandatory project that you do. So a certain amount of that would be done with other colleagues across other parts of the business, and then we'd have our own internal projects. So yeah, we actually have done a few of them in machine learning, but that would be just more to help with our own internal business development. So yeah, machine learning, we've done stuff in robotics, visualization, so on. So it wouldn't be 100% of the time, but there would be that concept for a certain proportion of time as well.
Brilliant. We might wrap up here, Ciaran. I don't want to keep you too long. Very aware that we're a bit over time, but thank you so much again.
No worries. All right. Thanks a million. Thanks, guys, and Sam for organizing it all.